Bismillah wa salatu wa salamu ala Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. It's great to be here in Lubbock, where you are extremely insecure. Everyone I've met has said, so how does it feel to be in Lubbock? Is this your first time in Lubbock? Isn't it in the middle of nowhere? Like, why are you so sad? I'm happy to be here. It's okay. Somebody asked me about the skyline in Lubbock, and I told them, I see a lot of sky, not a lot of line, but, but regardless, inshallah, I had a plan on what to speak with you about tonight, but as I was sitting here and kind of observing you, because what I like to do before I speak is observe the audience, so I was kind of checking you guys out, I decided to change everything I was going to talk about entirely. By the end of it, if I see depressed look on your faces, I'll go back to the more serious subject I was going to talk to you about. But what I do want to talk to you about is something that I was studying for some time, and it's a part of a program that I used to travel around the world with called Story Night, but it's a small part of it. And it has to do with a scene in a story in the Qur'an. But before I tell you that, or tell you a little bit about it, I want to tell you something very important. Muslim community here, I know some non-Muslims may be in the audience also. The Qur'an is flooded with stories. The majority of those stories are a retelling of a story that was already in the Bible. Okay, so the majority of the stories in the Qur'an are not the first time the world was introduced to that story. It's in fact the last time the world is hearing that story. And it's in a sense, the Qur'an is challenging the story that already existed. And it's saying, you got some of the details off. This is what really happened, right? So that's what the Qur'an is doing over and over again. And it's doing that in virtually every story. So one of the coolest studies that's emerged in the last 100 years is a comparison of the stories in the Qur'an with the stories in the Bible. Detail by detail, like not just the character by character, but detail by detail. And one of those most important stories, actually all of them are super important. I'll give you one tidbit, one small piece from a story that I'm not going to talk about today, but maybe another time when I come back. But I think this is really important because Muslims need to understand that even though we have a lot in common with the faith communities that are Jewish and Christian, we need to also understand what makes us different. And we need to be able to have intelligent conversations with our Jewish and Christian friends about what we have in common and what we don't have in common, especially when it comes to these stories. These stories took up so much space in the Qur'an that they're actually, you know how a building has pillars, right? One of the pillars of the Qur'an is actually its stories. Right? And when the Prophet ﷺ was reciting these stories and he was given these stories, there were people in the audience that were Christians, and there were people in the audience that were Jewish. And when they would hear those familiar names and those familiar places and those familiar events, they'd say, wait a second, we know about that. But that's not how we heard it. Right? So there would be a conversation without even being a conversation. It would already start happening in the minds of the audience. And that's something Muslims have to become more and more equipped with. That we need to understand our story, the story that Allah has given us on each of these prophets, and how it compares to what actually the world believed before. So one small detail that we won't go into today, but I wanted to give you a glimpse, is the story of creation. Right? And in the book of Genesis, in the Bible, there's the story of how God created, the world, and then God created Adam and Eve, right? That story. And I'm going to tell you some things, a summary of some things that are in the Bible, right? A summary of some things that are in the Bible. So he creates Adam and Eve, and in the biblical version, depending on which scholarly sources you look at, Eve convinced Adam to eat from, the devil convinced Eve, and Eve convinced Adam. Don't look at your wife right now. Okay, and then, they did the thing, they ate from the tree, and then God was really upset with them, so he stripped them of their clothes, right? And then he was angry with all three of them. Who's the three? The devil, Adam and Eve, right? Adam and Hawa. And he gave each of them a different punishment. So he gave the devil a punishment that he's going to crawl on his belly and he's going to be a serpent, right? That's his punishment. The punishment of Eve is that she used to be by the side of man. So she was made from his rib, and so she was always supposed to be by his side. No more. She is now owned by man. She is man's dominion. Okay, she's man's dominion. And whenever she gives birth, she's going to go through extreme pain. That's her punishment. And then God turns to Adam and says, well, because you messed up, because of you, there will be death in the world. So death would not have existed on this planet had it not been from him eating from the tree. And also, because of that, you're going to have to sweat and exhaust yourself to earn a living. Now you can't just pick fruits and pick food from wherever you want. You have to earn a living. So hard work and death are the punishment of Adam. And as a result of all three being brought to the earth, this planet that we're on, is essentially cursed. It's cursed. We're here because we're being punished. It's because our father messed up. And this story in Christian theology is called the fall, right? And they call it the fall because it's the fall from grace. It's man was created in the image of God, and the image of God broke when he did this mistake, when, he was chiefly responsible. And that's why we're all just kind of suffering, right? And we're here on this earth as a punishment. Okay. By the way, that story is from the Old Testament, which is a book common to both the Christian people and the Jewish people. But the Jewish people don't look at it that way. The Jewish people are like, yeah, he messed up. So what? Everybody messes up. No big deal. But God got over it. What we learn from that, the Jewish interpretation is completely different. And their idea is, well, he made a mistake, but God got over it because he's too special to God. We're the Israelites. We make mistakes. God gets over it. Yeah, he gets mad at us sometimes, but in the end, he loves us too much. He lets it go. So just like Adam was special to God, the Israelites are also special to God. There was this kind of an interpretation in the Jewish tradition. The Qur'an comes and tells a totally different story. It wasn't Eve that was convinced. It wasn't a curse to come to the earth. The fact that they ate from the tree and were brought to the earth, actually multiple times in the Qur'an, before he tells the story, he tells us this world is a place full of blessings and you should be grateful. If he was sending us to a cursed place, which is a prison, and a compensation for a punishment, like a payback, he wouldn't be saying, be grateful for the wonderful place I've put you in. Multiple times in the Qur'an. So our view is not life on this earth is a curse, and life on this earth is damnation, and life on this earth is death and suffering and all of that stuff. And by the way, because there's so much suffering, we need somebody to get us out of this suffering, right? Because we can't help ourselves, we messed up. That's where Jesus becomes important for the Christian creed, because now we're in suffering. Who's going to deliver us from this suffering? Jesus, right? But Muslims don't have that view. We're not in suffering. We came to this earth, we were put here as a result of that mistake to teach us, look, that's how good the devil is. He'll get you to eat from a tree even if you're in heaven, where you have all access to everything beyond your imagination. You're still going to go after the one thing you're not supposed to. That's how good he is. Now that you understand how the devil works, now you're ready to live on the earth. Now go to the earth. In fact, in the Qur'an, before Adam and Eve were even created, God told the angels, I've decided to put someone on the earth. I'm putting inni ja'ilun fil ardi khalifa. I'm putting someone who will be left behind on the earth to make choices and be held responsible. That's our view. We were always supposed to be here. Now let me ask you this, just rhetorically. Doesn't that completely change your view of life and what you're doing here? And how you're supposed to see tragedy and how you're supposed to see your role in the world? Right? It completely changes everything about how you see your religion and your worldview. And you know what's crazy? As I traveled the world in more detail, I discussed this story. I met many Muslims and I asked a survey too. I did surveys with youth, elders. Why was Adam alayhi salam sent to the earth? Muslim. I'm not asking Christians. I'm not asking Jews. I'm asking Muslims. Why was Adam sent to the earth? Allah punished him for eating the tree. Common answer among who? Muslims. But that's not the Muslim answer. That's the Christian answer. That's actually the biblical response. That's not the Qur'an's response. The Qur'an's giving a very different response to this issue. In fact, it's never described it as a punishment, ever. It's never done that. So what happened to us over time is we didn't realize how much we started borrowing from other traditions when we are interpreting our own book. And that actually happened in our history quite a bit, right? Anyway, that's not the story I wanted to talk to you about. That was just an idea to give you that from the beginning, there are stories, until we have a careful comparison, we're not really going to understand what is it that Allah is saying and what kind of amazing conversations we can have with people who have many commonalities with us in their faith, but, and we don't know that they have that much in common with our faith, right? In fact, one last thing I'll tell you about this. The Bible, the Qur'an, has more conversations directed at Christians than anybody else, other than the pagan Arabs. The Christians are a special focus in the Qur'an. They're a special focus. And that's because those stories are so significant to them. Biblical stories are a big space in the Qur'an. And that was supposed to facilitate conversations between us and them. That's why towards the end of the Qur'an, Allah told us, when they invite you to eat food with them, go eat with them. And you should invite them over and eat with them too. وَطَعَامُ الَّذِينَ أُوتُوا الْكِتَابَ حِلٌّ لَكُمْ وَطَعَامُكُمْ حِلٌّ لَهُمْ. Go eat with each other. Have these conversations, basically, is what was being told to us. Anyway,